Okay, imagine this. You get a letter, right? And it says, you owe almost $1,000 a day.
Just for living here in the U.S.
Yeah, just for continuing to live in the U.S.
Yeah.
And the letter, it threatens your car, your savings, basically everything you've worked for over years.
That-
Unless you just disappear.
wow. That sounds, well, frankly, unbelievable. Like something from a dystopian story.
It really does, but it's a chilling reality, or at least a very, very real fear for potentially millions of people.
And it's striking, isn't it, how one person's story can really shine a light on these sharp, often unseen edges of immigration policy.
Exactly, and that's what we're diving into today. We're going to unpack a situation that really puts an individual's life right up against these big shifts in how immigration laws are being enforced.
Yeah, we want to understand the complexities here.
Right. So for this deep dive, we're leaning heavily on a narrative from Story Driven English on YouTube. It's called Learning English Through News Level 2, $998 Daily Fine, Destroying Immigrant Dreams.
It paints a really vivid picture.
It does. And our mission really is to get beyond the headlines,
Yeah.
to understand this new approach to enforcement and what it really means for someone like the central figure, Miguel Fuentes.
Right. Someone who's built a life here, part of a community, and now faces something that seems almost designed to just dismantle all of that. We want to uncover the facts, sure, but also the human cost.
So let's talk about Miguel. Skilled carpenter. He's been living in Baltimore for, 15 years?
15 years, yeah. Came from Guatemala originally. Like so many, just looking for a better life, working hard.
Absolutely. Building a future, and then, bam, this letter arrives.
The catalyst. It's called a final notice of deportation order, which is serious enough on its own.
But this one had that extra sting, didn't it?
Oh, yeah, that terrifying addition. A daily fine, $998, effective immediately.
I just can't imagine the panic. He must have instantly realized
Yeah.
what that adds up incredibly fast.
Exactly. He figured it out quick. Those fines would wipe out his entire year's income in just a matter of weeks.
And then there was the mention of it being retroactive.
Yeah.
And asset seizure.
Right. That just piled on the fear. It's not just future earnings, it's everything he already has. His savings, his used car he relies on, suddenly all completely at risk.
This is where it gets really personal, isn't it? Beyond policy.
It is. Thankfully, he had a friend, Elena. She's a community organizer.
Okay, so she could offer some context.
Yeah, she explained that this is actually rooted in an older law, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996, IRRR.
So the law itself isn't brand new.
No, but the way it's being enforced now,
Yeah.
that's the key. This aggressive use of fines, and especially making them retroactive, that's a huge shift, a dramatic one.
Which is why they called an emergency meeting, right? At
Yeah.
the community center.
Exactly, St. Francis Community Center. It shows how widespread the anxiety was, needing immediate answers. Community networks become so vital then.
And Miguel's just reeling, thinking about practical stuff, his savings, the car, the future he'd planned.
And he even calls his sister back in Guatemala, which tells you how worried he was. Plus, he's thinking about his boss, John Matthews. What does this mean for his job?
Yeah, that adds another layer of stress, the ripple effects.
Totally. It impacts everyone, families, communities, businesses. That relationship with his employer becomes really important later on.
So the community meeting, packed, right? Just filled with worried people.
Yeah, you can just picture it. The anxiety must have been thick in the air. Restaurant workers, construction folks like Miguel, landscapers, everyone facing the same uncertainty.
It really shows the scale of who this could hit.
Absolutely. And that's where Sarah Goldstein, the immigration attorney, comes in.
Okay, the legal expert. What does she say?
She confirmed, yes, these penalties are in that 1996 law. But, and this is crucial, enforcing them like this, so aggressively, that's very new. A major departure from how it used to be handled.
So it's an old tool being used in a new, much harsher way.
Precisely. She talked about the scale, the retroactive part,
Mm-hmm.
potentially going back 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
At nearly $1,000 a day. That's
Over $1 million. Easily. And the asset seizure threat. Very real. And it could even affect U.S. citizens in mixed-status families.
wow. That retroactive part seems legally questionable, doesn't it? Fairness, due process.
That's exactly where the legal challenges lie. Applying huge penalties for past actions when enforcement was minimal before. That raises big questions. And hitting U.S. citizens indirectly, that complicates it further.
So Miguel asks, can I fight this? What are the options?
Sarah's pretty blunt. The law's on the books, so getting it dismissed entirely. Unlikely. The main angles are fighting the retroactive application and arguing the fines are excessive, disproportionate.
Like under the Eighth Amendment, against excessive fines.
Exactly. That's a potential strategy. But she warns him these are tough legal battles.
Mm-hmm.
Long, uncertain, no guarantees at all.
Then she mentions, what was it, an app?
Yes, CBP Home, the government's mobile app for self-deportation.
Kidding, an app for self-deportation.
That was the reaction in the room. Apparently, an older guy just couldn't believe it. Leave his business, his home, his U.S. citizen family. Just use an app and go.
It sounds so impersonal, almost dehumanizing.
That's how it struck many people, putting the entire burden on the person to dismantle their life under this immense financial threat.
And someone else shared a story about Phoenix.
Yeah, a guy named Carlos.
Yeah.
Said people were already leaving Phoenix, selling everything, sometimes just abandoning homes. He compared it to the crackdowns back in 2018, just widespread fear.
So it wasn't just Miguel. This was happening elsewhere.
Seems like it. Creating this impossible choice, right? Stay and face financial ruin, potentially taking your family down with you, or leave, tearing your family apart if some are citizens.
It's a horrific choice. Just brutal.
It really exposes the ethical core of the policy, doesn't it? Forcing people into these no-win situations makes you question the values behind it.
So Miguel gets his one-on-one consultation with Sarah Goldstein.
Right. And you see him really focusing, trying to understand. His English is careful, deliberate.
And we learn more about his specific case.
Yeah. Crossed in 2010, applied for asylum in 2012, but it was denied in 2015. He appealed. Then this 2023 deportation order came through, which he claims he never actually received.
Never received it. That seems significant.
It could be. It adds another layer of potential injustice, maybe a point for legal challenge, if he never got proper notice.
And based on that 2023 date, Sarah calculates the potential retroactive fines.
And it's staggering. Potentially back to 2023, over $1.8 million.
$1.8 million. It's just impossible to grasp.
And she's clear, the goal isn't really collecting that money. It's designed to force voluntary departure.
Yeah.
And if you don't leave, they seize assets to cover it.
What kind of assets?
Bank accounts, his car, any property in his name. She mentioned joint assets are trickier legally, might face challenges, but still potentially on the table.
So the legal options she laid out for him specifically, still pretty bleak.
Very limited. Option 1, motion to reopen his asylum case. Success rate, very low, she admits.
Option 2.
Challenge the retroactive fines. Again, long, uncertain, expensive legal fight.
Option 3.
Voluntary departure. Just leave.
None of those sound good.
Not at all. And voluntary departure isn't simple either. It comes with a penalty.
What's that?
A 10-year bar. He couldn't legally try to come back for a decade, and getting the waivers needed after that, extremely difficult. It's basically exile from the life he built.
What about just disappearing, going underground?
He asked about that, but Sarah warned him. ICE tracking methods are getting more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Living like that means constant fear, always looking over your shoulder. It's really no way to live.
So her main advice was,
Document everything. Every notice, every interaction, any proof of his life and ties here.
right.
That paperwork, she said, might be his only leverage later on.
Okay. So after that sobering meeting, he talks to his boss, John Matthews.
Right. They've worked together for 8 years. Good relationship. John apparently never really pushed about Miguel's status before.
It just wasn't an issue for him.
No. But the climate had changed. Big time.
How?
More I-9 audits. That's where the government checks employer records, make sure everyone's authorized to work.
And the penalties for employers got tougher.
Much tougher. Big fines, even potential criminal charges for hiring undocumented workers. So the pressure was mounting on employers, too.
And then John gets a letter.
Yep. An official letter from ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, requesting employment verification. And Miguel's name was specifically on the list.
Oh, boy. So John couldn't ignore it anymore.
Exactly. That forced his hand. He had to balance loyalty to Miguel with his legal duties and the risk to his business.
How did he handle it?
He was clearly uncomfortable, but he knew he had to respond truthfully. However, he didn't just fire Miguel immediately.
No. What did he do?
He gave him 2 weeks' notice, full pay through the end of the month, and even gave him a bonus. It was actually quite supportive given the circumstances.
That shows some real decency.
It does. And then he said something pretty powerful. He told Miguel he'd rehire him in a heartbeat if his status ever changed. And he said he thought America was a better place because of people like Miguel.
Wow. That's quite a statement. A real human connection there.
It really is. Shows that some employers do see the value these workers bring, beyond just the legal status.
Okay, so Miguel still needs legal help. He tries a legal aid clinic next.
Right. But the scene there is just overwhelming. A line around the block.
Huge demand.
Massive. The volunteer basically says, look, we can only see maybe 50 people today. Try again next week. The need just swamps the resources.
And while he's waiting, he meets a couple.
Yeah, Roberto and Maria. An older Salvadoran couple. Been here 15 years. Own a home. Small business.
And they got hit with the fines, too.
Nearly $1 million, they said. And their decision was heartbreaking.
What were they going to do?
Sell everything. The house, the business, everything they'd worked for. And go back to El Salvador. They just felt they had no other choice. Cornered.
That's devastating. Losing everything after building a life for 15 years.
It really illustrates the human cost, doesn't it? And then something else happened while they were all waiting.
What?
ICE agents showed up at the clinic.
No. Yeah, I can imagine the panic.
Instant fear rippling through the line.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the lawyers there stepped in right away, cited the rules about sensitive locations, but it shook everyone up.
And Roberta said something chilling.
Yeah. Afterwards, he apparently said fear. That's their most powerful weapon.
Wow. That really sticks with you.
It does. And seeing all that, the overwhelming need, the raw fear, Miguel decides he can't just wait around.
He leaves the clinic line.
Yeah. He realizes he needs to do something more proactive right now.
And his decision isn't self-deportation or staying in Baltimore under that pressure.
No. He decides to move, go to another state.
Where does he choose?
He does some research and picks New Mexico.
Why New Mexico?
He figured it had maybe stronger local protections for immigrants, a larger Hispanic population where he might, blend in more easily, feel less targeted.
Yeah.
It's a strategic move.
So he packs up, leaves Baltimore.
Yeah. Packs his stuff, leaves the apartment. He has that money from John, plus his own savings, about $12,000 total. A small cushion, but something.
Saying goodbye to Elena must have been tough.
Oh, definitely. Very emotional. He explains about the ICE inquiry at work, and she gives him this notebook
A notebook.
filled with contacts, immigrant support groups in other states, a real lifeline from a friend.
That's thoughtful, but still leaving 15 years behind.
The pain of that must have been immense. All those connections, memories,
Yeah.
just gone because of this policy. A huge disruption.
So he heads west, carefully planning the route.
Yeah. Trying to avoid states known for tough enforcement, steering clear of border checkpoints.
And he has time to think on that drive.
A lot of time. He reflects on the policy itself. That specific fine amount, $998, seems so calculated. The retroactive part. It felt to him like the government just wanted to make life unbearable so people would leave voluntarily.
And he's seeing news reports confirming this isn't just a threat.
Right. Stories about bank accounts being frozen, assets actually seized. It's happening.
And he contrasts that with his life in Baltimore.
Yeah. Though he felt like he belonged, now he feels like a refugee almost.
Right.
In the country he considered home. It's a really sad, powerful contrast.
He arrives in Albuquerque. New place, new landscape. What are his first steps?
Practical ones. Find a weekly motel for temporary housing and visit a day labor center run by a workers' rights group. Got to find work fast.
Does he find something?
Yeah, he connects with the coordinator there, Ramon, and pretty quickly gets regular work with a guy named Gabriel Mendoza,
Dude.
restoring historic adobe homes.
Yeah.
His carpentry skills translate well, thankfully.
How's the pay?
A bit lower than Baltimore, but the cost of living is lower too, so it balances out somewhat. That's crucial for him now.
Finding permanent housing is usually tough.
It was. But eventually he finds this little place, a casita, rented out by an elderly couple.
And they were okay with his situation.
Apparently they cared more about him being responsible than his documents. Sometimes that personal connection makes all the difference, you know?
So he starts to rebuild
Yeah.
cautiously.
Very cautiously, living under the radar mostly, using cash. But he starts making connections. He meets a woman, Lucia, at a church community lunch.
Another immigrant.
Yeah, from Peru. She has her own story, overstayed a student visa. They connect over that shared experience of being outsiders. A friendship starts.
And the church community helps.
Slowly, yeah.
Hmm.
His social circle starts to expand a bit through the church, offers some much-needed support in a new place.
So after about 6 months, he's found a kind of stability. Fragile, but stable.
Right. And then, unexpected news.
What happened?
A news alert pops up. The Supreme Court has temporarily blocked the immigration fine policy.
Whoa, a temporary block. That's huge.
A real glimmer of hope. It came from a lawsuit challenging the policy's constitutionality, especially the retroactive part and the sheer size of the fines.
But Lucia warns him it's only temporary, right?
Exactly. Smart caution. A temporary stay is good, stops the immediate bleeding, but the underlying policy isn't dead yet. The legal fight isn't over.
And then more news from back east.
Yeah, Elena calls, and this is pretty amazing, a coalition of employers in Baltimore, including John Matthews.
His old boss.
Yes, they're actively advocating for their undocumented workers now. John's even speaking publicly, using Miguel's situation anonymously as an example of how harmful the policy is.
That's a significant shift, employers pushing back.
It really is. It seems the extreme nature of the policy kind of backfired. It made some people, some Americans, see the human cost in a way they hadn't before. Woke them up a bit.
So then the actual Supreme Court ruling comes down. What was the decision?
It was split. Complicated.
Oh, so.
Okay, big win. They ruled the retroactive application unconstitutional. 6-3 decision. So those massive past fines, Gone.
That's enormous relief.
But the court also said the government does have the authority to impose these kinds of fines going forward. That was 5-4. Though they did suggest lower courts should look at whether the 998 amount itself is excessive.
So no giant back fines, but the threat of future daily fines remains if they give proper notice.
Exactly. The immediate $1 million threat is lifted. Huge relief. But the underlying risk for the future, still there. Leaves people in limbo. Still anxious.
How does this affect Miguel's thinking?
It opens things up again. He seriously starts considering going back to Baltimore. He has connections there, that job offer from John.
But Lucia suggests another path.
Yeah, she throws out this third option. What about applying for legal status somewhere else entirely, like Canada or New Zealand? Places that might actually value his carpentry skills.
Starting over again in a new country.
Right. He's hesitant, naturally. 50 years in the U.S., deep roots. But the logic is appealing, living openly, legally, without fear. It's compelling.
Does he look into it?
Yeah, he starts researching. Canada, New Zealand immigration programs, requirements, costs, language issues, getting his skills verified, adapting to a whole new culture. It's a lot to consider.
And meanwhile, what's happening back in Baltimore?
Things seem to be evolving. More community organizing, businesses and churches forming coalitions, the city strengthening sanctuary policies. And John Matthews is really out there becoming a vocal advocate. It feels different, more supportive than when he left.
So Miguel has a big decision to make. Stay hidden in Albuquerque, pursue immigration elsewhere, or
return to Baltimore. And that's what he decides.
going back.
Yeah. Not emigrating, not staying hidden. He wants to reconnect with his community, talk to lawyers there about the new legal situation, and join that movement for reform he's hearing about.
Even with the risks, ICE, potential future fines.
He knows the risks are still there. But he feels like living in fear isn't really living. And if things are going to change, people need to stand up. It's a courageous choice.
The journey back east must feel different.
Definitely. Less panic, more purpose. He's reflecting on how this really harsh policy actually seemed to unexpectedly shift the conversation in some ways.
And then another twist while he's driving back.
Elena calls again. Huge news. The government just announced a new program, a compliance and contribution program.
Oh, okay. What is that?
It offers temporary work authorization for 3 years to certain undocumented immigrants who already have deportation orders.
What the requirements?
You need a clean record, proof of paying taxes, community ties. In return, you have to waive some legal challenges, check in regularly with ICE, and, crucially, the deportation order itself. It stays on your record.
So temporary permission to work, but the underlying order remains.
Exactly. A temporary fix, maybe.
And John Matthews thinks Miguel would qualify.
Yeah. John's convinced he's a perfect candidate. So Miguel gets back to Baltimore, finds temporary housing, and immediately sees an attorney, David Martinez.
And the lawyer agrees.
Yes. Martinez confirms Miguel looks like a strong applicant, especially because of that issue with never receiving proper notice of the original deportation order.
What are the pros and cons of this program?
Pros. Work legally for 3 years. Protection from deportation during that time. Get a driver's license. Big quality of life improvements.
Cons.
Cons. You're fully on ICE's radar. High visibility. What happens after 3 years?
Yeah.
Potential for targeted enforcement then. And you're formally acknowledging the deportation order by participating. It's a trade-off.
So Miguel reconnects with people in Baltimore. Does it feel different?
He really notices a change. More empathy, more support from the broader community. It seems the shared struggle brought people together somewhat.
And John Matthews
Invites him for dinner. Still advocating strongly for reform. He talks about his own journey, how this whole thing opened his eyes to the human and economic reality for people like Miguel.
And he offers practical help.
Big time. John offers to formally sponsor Miguel's application for the compliance program.
So Miguel decides to go for it.
Yes. With John's support, the chance to work legally, to live without that immediate fear. He decides to apply. He accepts the limitations, but it's a path forward.
It's kind of amazing, isn't it, how this punitive fine policy ended up sparking community action and these alternative, if imperfect, solutions.
It really is an unintended consequence. The policy was meant to push people out, but it seems to have strengthened community bonds and forced some creative thinking, some new approaches.
Does he get approved for the program?
Yes.
Yeah.
After about 3 months, he gets the approval notice.
That must have felt incredible.
Huge relief, I imagine. He goes back to work at Matthews Construction, full of enthusiasm, and they actually promote him to lead carpenter, recognizing his skill and loyalty.
That's fantastic. A moment of real success after so much hardship.
Absolutely. But we have to remember the fine policy itself. It likely still affects others who didn't qualify for this program, and advocacy groups are still fighting it in court.
Right. The bigger questions about permanent status, they haven't gone away.
Not at all. This program is temporary. The fundamental issues need lasting solutions.
So the story ends with Miguel back at work, contributing part of his community again. He's resilient. He has temporary protection, but the future is still uncertain.
It really underscores that resilience, doesn't it? People finding ways to keep going, keep contributing, even when the system puts up huge barriers. But the need for real reform, for permanent solutions, is still crystal clear.
So thinking about the big takeaways here, this daily fine policy, it was clearly meant to force people out through financial pressure, right? Compel self-deportation.
That was absolutely the intent. Make life untenable.
But the unexpected outcome was this wave of resistance. Community support, employers stepping up, legal challenges. It didn't just roll over people.
No, it really didn't. It showed the power of community, advocacy, the legal system pushing back. It demonstrates that even harsh policies can face significant, sometimes surprising, opposition.
And it's just such a stark reminder of how precarious life is for so many immigrants. Even these temporary programs like the compliance one, they're helpful, sure, but they're not the answer.
Exactly. They're temporary fixes, Band-Aids maybe. They highlight the desperate need for real, comprehensive immigration reform that offers stable, permanent pathways for people who are already part of our communities.
Which leaves us with some big questions, doesn't it? Like, after hearing Miguel's story, what does it really mean to belong somewhere? To contribute? Does legal status define that entirely?
And ethically, what does it say about us when policies are designed specifically to create such extreme hardship, such financial ruin for vulnerable groups?
It forces you to look past the politics and see the actual human beings caught in the middle, their stories.
Absolutely. These aren't abstract debates. They have profound impacts on real lives, real families. Recognizing the dignity and contribution of everyone, regardless of status, seems crucial.
If folks listening want to understand more, what should they look into?
Definitely worth researching that 1996 law, IRAIRI. See if there are programs like this compliance and contribution idea being discussed or implemented, and look into the work of immigrant rights organizations, both local and national. They do vital work.
Yeah, getting informed is key. Digging into the legal background, the current context, it helps build a real understanding.
And connecting with the advocacy groups gives insight into the ongoing fight for reform and the support systems that exist.
And we should mention again, if you like these kinds of narratives, blending language learning with important current events, Check out that YouTube channel, Story Driven English. They do great work.
Yeah, personal stories like Miguel's are just so powerful. They build empathy, help us understand the human side of these complex policies beyond just the talking points.
Well, thank you for taking this pretty intense deep dive with us today.
Thank you. It's an important story to unpack.
Until our next exploration, keep seeking to understand.